The phone call that would ground Flight 447 and trigger a federal investigation began with 4 simple words from a 10-year-old boy: "Dad, I need help." But to understand how those words carried such devastating power, we need to go back 12 minutes earlier, to when Zion Carter first stepped aboard the Boeing 777 with the nervous excitement of a child experiencing his first solo flight. Zion clutched his boarding pass like a treasure map, the crisp paper showing Seat 3A in bold letters. First class, window seat, exactly what his father had promised for this special trip to visit Grandma Rose in Miami. At 10 years old, Zion felt incredibly grown-up walking through the premium cabin, his small carry-on rolling behind him with the unaccompanied minor tags fluttering like badges of honor. The seat was everything he'd imagined. Leather that smelled expensive, a window perfectly positioned to watch the ground fall away during takeoff, enough space for his legs to swing freely. Zion settled in carefully, placing his backpack in the seat pocket and securing his seatbelt with the precise movements of a child determined to do everything correctly. "Excuse me, sweetheart." The voice belonged to a woman who radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. Margaret Thornfield stood in the aisle, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the cabin lights, her navy business suit tailored to perfection. Everything about her screamed first-class frequent flyer, from her designer carry-on to the way she surveyed the cabin like she owned it. "You're obviously in the wrong section, honey," Margaret continued, her tone dripping with condescending sweetness. "This is first class. Your family is probably back in coach wondering where you wandered off to." Zion looked up with confused dark eyes, his voice small but clear. "Ma'am, this is my seat. See?" He held up his boarding pass with careful precision, the way his father had taught him to always keep his documentation ready. Margaret barely glanced at the boarding pass, instead focusing on what she saw, a young black boy in jeans and a superhero t-shirt, clearly out of place among the business travelers and wealthy passengers she expected in premium seating. "Oh sweetie, there's obviously been some computer mistake," she said, her smile never wavering even as her eyes hardened. "Children like you don't sit in first class. Let me call the flight attendant to fix this little mix-up." Without waiting for Zion's response, Margaret pressed the call button and began settling into his seat, her movements deliberate and possessive. She placed her Louis Vuitton bag in the overhead compartment with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her assumptions. Zion remained standing in the aisle, his boarding pass trembling slightly in his small hands. Other passengers were beginning to notice the commotion, their conversations quieting as they watched the scene unfold. Flight attendant Jessica Morrison approached with the practiced smile of someone trained to handle passenger disputes diplomatically. At 26, she'd seen enough airline drama to recognize trouble when it walked aboard in expensive shoes. "What seems to be the problem here?" Jessica asked, her voice carefully neutral. Margaret spoke before Zion could respond. "This child is clearly confused about his seat assignment. I need you to help him find his family back in coach so we can proceed with departure." Jessica looked at Zion, who silently held up his boarding pass. She examined it carefully, her expression shifting as she processed what she was seeing. "Ma'am," Jessica said to Margaret, "this boarding pass clearly shows seat 3A. This young man appears to be in his correct seat." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "That's impossible. Look at him, he's obviously not a first-class passenger. There must be some error in your system." The ugly implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the prejudice underlying Margaret's objections but uncertain whether to intervene. Zion's voice cut through the tension with startling clarity. "Ma'am, my name is Zion Carter. I'm traveling as an unaccompanied minor to visit my grandmother in Miami. This is definitely my seat." Something in his tone, the precise diction, the calm confidence despite his obvious nervousness, made Jessica look more carefully at the boarding pass and the accompanying documentation. Mr. Carter, Jessica said formally, acknowledging his dignity despite his age, I see you're traveling as an unaccompanied minor. Let me verify your reservation details. Margaret's frustration was becoming more obvious. This is ridiculous. I fly this route every month. I know who belongs in first class and who doesn't. And who exactly belongs in first class? Asked Dr. Rachel Kim, a passenger seated across the aisle. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to challenging inappropriate behavior. Margaret turned toward her with practiced innocence. Business travelers, adults with important meetings, people who understand airline etiquette. Not children who clearly don't belong. Children whose parents can afford first-class tickets. Dr. Kim pressed, her meaning unmistakable. The confrontation was attracting attention throughout the first-class cabin. Business travelers looked up from their phones and laptops, watching the drama unfold with uncomfortable fascination. Jessica returned with a tablet, her expression troubled. Ma'am, she addressed Margaret, Mr. Carter's reservation is confirmed for seat 3A. May I see your boarding pass? Margaret fumbled in her purse, producing a boarding pass that clearly showed seat 12F, middle row, coach section. Her face flushed as the evidence contradicted her claims. There must be some mistake, Margaret insisted, her voice rising. I specifically requested first class. I have important business in Miami. Ma'am, your ticket shows coach seating. Mr. Carter's reservation shows first class, confirmed and paid for. Jessica's professional patience was clearly being tested. Zion had remained remarkably composed throughout this exchange, but now he spoke with quiet determination that seemed far beyond his 10 years. Ma'am, I understand you want to sit here, but this is my seat. My dad bought this ticket for me because it's my first time flying alone and he wanted me to be comfortable. Margaret's eyes flashed with something ugly. Your dad? Let me guess, he's probably back there in coach 2, right? Look, little boy, adults are talking. Why don't you go find your family and let the grown-ups handle this? The casual cruelty in her tone made several passengers gasp audibly. Dr. Kim started to stand, her face flushed with anger, but Zion held up his small hand with surprising authority. Actually, ma'am, Zion said, reaching for his phone with steady hands, I think I should call my dad and let him know what's happening. Margaret laughed, a harsh sound that carried no warmth. Oh, this should be good. Let's see what Daddy has to say about his son playing pretend in first class. But as Zion dialed a number with the confident movements of a child who'd been taught exactly what to do in situations like this, Margaret had no idea that she'd just made the most expensive mistake of her life. The phone connected on the first ring. Dad, Zion said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent first-class cabin, I need help. What this 10-year-old said next shocked the entire plane. Subscribe so you don't miss it, asterisk. The silence in first class was deafening as every passenger strained to hear Zion's side of the phone conversation. Margaret Thornfield sat smugly in the stolen seat, confident that whatever parent answered would quickly apologize and retrieve their confused child. Hi, Dad. I'm on the plane, but there's a problem, Zion said with the careful precision his father had taught him for exactly this type of situation. A lady took my seat and says I don't belong in first class. Margaret rolled her eyes theatrically for the benefit of watching passengers. This is going to be embarrassing when Daddy realizes Junior was pretending to be something he's not. But Dr. Rachel Kim, seated across the aisle, noticed something that made her lean forward with interest. Zion wasn't speaking like a child making up stories. His voice carried the measured tone of someone reporting facts, not emotions. Yes, sir. Seat 3A, just like you said, Zion continued into the phone. The lady says there must be a computer mistake because children like me don't sit in first class. Margaret's confident expression flickered slightly at the child's precise recounting of her exact words. She hadn't expected him to be quite so accurate. Flight attendant Jessica Morrison stood nearby, tablet in hand, watching this unusual situation unfold with growing unease. In her 6 years of airline service, she'd seen plenty of seating disputes, but something about this felt different. The child's composure was remarkable, and his documentation was unquestionably legitimate. Her name? Zion glanced at Margaret politely. "Ma'am, my dad would like to know your name." Margaret's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Tell your father I'm Margaret Thornfield, and I'm trying to help his son understand appropriate airline behavior." Zion repeated the name into his phone, and then something extraordinary happened. The change in his voice was subtle but unmistakable, a shift from nervous child to someone delivering information of critical importance. "Dad, she also said that people like me don't understand airline etiquette and should go back where we belong." Zion's voice remained steady, but every word carried precision that made the watching adults uncomfortable. Margaret's face began showing the first signs of genuine concern. The child was documenting her statements with uncomfortable accuracy. "Yes, sir. The flight attendant confirmed my seat assignment, but the lady says I must be mistaken." Zion listened to his phone for several seconds, his expression growing more confident. "Okay, Dad. I'll put her on speaker now." Margaret straightened defensively. "I'm not talking to." But Zion had already activated the speaker function, and a voice filled the first-class cabin that made Jessica Morrison's blood run cold with recognition. "This is Vincent Carter, CEO of Carter Technologies and principal investor in Meridian Airlines." The voice was calm, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable power of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. "To whom am I speaking?" The effect was instantaneous. Jessica's face went pale as she recognized the name of one of the airline's most significant shareholders. Dr. Kim sat back with sudden understanding, while other passengers began whispering among themselves. Margaret, however, was too committed to her position to back down gracefully. "Mr. Carter, I'm Margaret Thornfield, and I think there's been a misunderstanding about your son's seating assignment. I travel this route frequently, and I know first-class protocol." "Ms. Thornfield," Vincent Carter's voice cut through her explanation like ice, "are you currently occupying seat 3A on flight 447? "Well, yes, but only because that seat was purchased by Carter Technologies for my son's exclusive use during this flight." "Are you suggesting that a 10-year-old child fabricated his boarding pass and documentation?" Margaret's composure began cracking under the weight of her increasingly untenable position. "Of course not, but surely you understand that there are appropriate accommodations for different types of passengers." The silence that followed was so profound that passengers could hear the aircraft's ventilation system cycling. When Vincent Carter spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous calm that made everyone listening uncomfortable. "Different types of passengers, Miss Thornfield? Please elaborate on what you mean by that." Margaret realized she was walking into a trap, but her prejudices had committed her too deeply to retreat. "I simply mean that first class is designed for business travelers and adults who understand the environment. Perhaps your son would be more comfortable in a section with other families." "Other families?" Vincent's voice remained deadly calm. "Ms. Thornfield, are you suggesting that my son should be segregated based on some characteristic you've identified?" Dr. Kim was now recording the conversation on her phone, recognizing that she was witnessing something that would likely have significant legal ramifications. Jessica Morrison stepped forward, her professional training finally overriding her shock. "Mr. Carter, this is Flight Attendant Morrison. I apologize for this situation. Your son's documentation is completely in order, and I'll resolve this seating issue immediately." "Thank you, Ms. Morrison. But I'm more interested in hearing Ms. Thornfield's explanation for why she believes my son doesn't belong in the seat I purchased for him." Margaret was trapped between her prejudices and her growing realization that she'd made a terrible mistake. "Look, I didn't mean anything inappropriate. I just thought there might be some confusion about the reservation." "What kind of confusion would cause you to assume a properly documented passenger didn't belong in his assigned seat?" Vincent pressed relentlessly. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Margaret looked around the cabin, seeing the faces of passengers who were now clearly judging her behavior. Her confident demeanor had completely evaporated. I made an assumption based on what I observed." "And what exactly did you observe that led you to conclude my 10-year-old son was lying about his seat assignment?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. Vincent Carter's voice continued with the precision of someone who'd built a billion-dollar empire by reading people and situations accurately. "Ms. Morrison, I need you to document this incident in your official flight report. Ms. Thornfield's behavior represents exactly the type of discrimination that Meridian Airlines has pledged to eliminate." Jessica was typing rapidly on her tablet, her face flushed with the realization that her handling of this situation would likely be scrutinized by airline executives. "Dad," Zion's voice cut through the tension with remarkable composure for a 10-year-old, "should I move to a different seat so the lady can sit down?" The question showcased a maturity that made every adult in the cabin feel ashamed of their failure to immediately defend him. "Absolutely not, son. You sit exactly where you belong. Miss Thornfield can locate her assigned seat in coach." Margaret finally understood that she'd lost this battle completely, but her pride wouldn't allow graceful surrender. "This is ridiculous. I've been flying first class for 20 years. I know who belongs here. And I've been investing in airlines for 15 years, Vincent replied coolly. "I also know who belongs where. Ms. Morrison, please escort Ms. Thornfield to her assigned seat and note in your report that she refused to vacate a seat belonging to an unaccompanied minor." As Margaret gathered her belongings with furious embarrassment, Vincent Carter's voice continued, now addressing the entire first-class cabin through the phone speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that my son's first solo flight has been disrupted by this unfortunate incident. I want to assure everyone that Meridian Airlines takes discrimination against any passenger very seriously." Dr. Kim spoke up clearly. "Mr. Carter, your son handled this situation with remarkable dignity. You should be very proud." "Thank you, Dr. Kim. Zion, are you comfortable now?" "Yes, Dad. Thank you." Zion's voice carried relief and pride in equal measure. But as Margaret reluctantly moved toward coach, muttering under her breath about political correctness and special treatment, she had no idea that her discrimination against a 10-year-old boy had just triggered something far more serious than a seating dispute. Because Vincent Carter's final words before ending the call would reveal that this wasn't just about stolen seats. "Son, you did exactly what we practiced. The federal agents monitoring this flight now have everything they need." The marshal's announcement left everyone speechless. "Subscribe before you're left behind, asterisk." The words, "federal agents," had barely left Vincent Carter's phone when two passengers in business casual clothing stood up simultaneously from seats 5B and 7A. Their movements were coordinated and professional, instantly transforming from anonymous travelers into unmistakably federal law enforcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI Civil Rights Division," announced the woman from 5B, displaying her badge with practiced authority. "My partner Agent Marcus Rodriguez and I have been conducting surveillance on this flight as part of an ongoing federal investigation." The first-class cabin erupted in surprised murmurs and nervous shifting. Margaret Thornfield, who had been reluctantly gathering her belongings, froze in the aisle with her face draining of color. "Ma'am," Agent Chen addressed Margaret directly, "please remain in your current location. We need to speak with you about your interaction with the minor passenger." Zion looked up from his rightful seat with wide eyes, but his voice remained steady when he spoke into his phone. "Dad, there are FBI agents on the plane. Vincent Carter's chuckle carried clearly through the speaker. I know, son. Agent Chen and I have been coordinating this operation for 6 months. Dr. Rachel Kim leaned forward with fascination. Mr. Carter, are you saying this entire situation was planned? Not the discrimination itself, Dr. Kim. We hoped that wouldn't happen. But we've been investigating systematic discrimination against minority passengers on commercial airlines, and this flight was selected for federal monitoring. Agent Rodriguez approached Margaret with a small recording device. Ms. Thornfield, you should know that your entire interaction with Master Carter has been recorded for federal civil rights investigation purposes. Margaret's confident demeanor completely collapsed. I didn't know. I was just trying to help with what seemed like a seething confusion. Ma'am, Agent Chen interrupted, you made several statements that suggest discrimination based on race and age. Specifically, you claimed that children like him don't belong in first class and should go back where they belong. Flight attendant Jessica Morrison stepped forward, her tablet ready. Agents, I documented the entire interaction per company policy. Ms. Thornfield also made comments about appropriate accommodations for different types of passengers. Agent Rodriguez consulted his notes. Ms. Morrison, has Ms. Thornfield flown this route before? Jessica checked her tablet nervously. According to our frequent flyer records, Ms. Thornfield has filed 17 complaints in the past 2 years about what she termed inappropriate passenger placement in premium seating. The revelation hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. This wasn't an isolated incident of prejudice, it was a pattern of systematic discrimination. 17 complaints. Dr. Kim asked with disgust. About what? Agent Chen pulled out a tablet and began reading. Complaints about urban youth in business class, improperly dressed ethnic families in first class, suspicious foreign passengers who probably don't understand airline protocols. Margaret's face had gone completely white. Those were legitimate concerns about airline security and appropriate passenger behavior. Ms. Thornfield, Agent Rodriguez interrupted, every single complaint you filed was about passengers of color. Every single one resulted in those passengers being moved to coach or removed from flights entirely. The systematic nature of Margaret's discrimination was becoming clear to everyone in the cabin. This wasn't casual prejudice, it was calculated harassment designed to exclude specific populations from premium airline services. Zion's voice cut through the tense atmosphere with remarkable clarity. Agents, may I ask a question? Agent Chen smiled at the 10-year-old's politeness. Of course, Master Carter. Were other kids hurt by what she was doing? The question demonstrated a maturity that made every adult in the cabin feel ashamed they hadn't immediately stood up for him. Yes, Agent Chen replied gently. We've documented cases where unaccompanied minors from minority families were moved from their assigned seats based on complaints similar to what we witnessed today. Vincent Carter's voice through the phone carried barely controlled anger. Agent Chen, please tell my son how many children were affected. In the past 18 months, 43 unaccompanied minors have been moved from premium seating following discrimination complaints. 38 of those children were Black, Latino, or Asian. The statistics hit the cabin like a physical blow. Dr. Kim started recording on her phone again, recognizing the historical significance of what was being revealed. Margaret tried one final desperate defense. I was protecting airline security. Some passengers just don't fit the profile of typical first-class travelers. What profile is that, Ms. Thornfield? Agent Rodriguez asked with deadly calm. Margaret realized she was digging herself deeper with every word, but her prejudices wouldn't allow her to stop. Business travelers, people who understand airline etiquette, passengers who won't cause disruptions. Like 10-year-old children who show their boarding passes politely and sit quietly in their assigned seats. Agent Chen's voice carried razor-sharp sarcasm. The trap was perfect. Margaret had just admitted that she considered well-behaved minority children to be disruptions simply because of their race. Jessica Morrison was typing frantically on her tablet, documenting everything for what was clearly going to be a major federal case. Ms. Morrison, Agent Chen continued, how did airline staff typically respond to Ms. Thornfield's complaints? Jessica's face showed genuine shame. Our policy has been to accommodate frequent flyer complaints to maintain customer satisfaction. We've moved passengers when elite status travelers expressed concerns. Even when those passengers had legitimate tickets and were causing no actual problems. Yes, ma'am. We were instructed to avoid conflicts with high-value customers. Vincent Carter's voice carried through the phone with the authority of someone who owns significant airline stock. Agent Chen, please inform Ms. Morrison that those policies violated federal civil rights laws and exposed Meridian Airlines to massive legal liability. The implications were staggering. Not just individual discrimination, but systematic corporate policies that enabled and encouraged racial segregation on commercial aircraft. Agent Rodriguez approached other first-class passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to ask if any of you have witnessed similar incidents on previous flights. An elderly gentleman in seat 2B raised his hand reluctantly. I've seen situations where passengers were moved after complaints. I always assumed there were legitimate reasons. Dr. Kim spoke up more forcefully. I witnessed Ms. Thornfield complaining about a Latino family last month on the Denver route. The family was moved to coach despite having first-class tickets. Agent Chen nodded grimly. That incident is part of our investigation. The family filed a civil rights complaint after being humiliated in front of their children. Margaret was now visibly shaking, finally understanding the scope of the legal consequences she faced. I never intended. I was just, the airline policies encouraged passenger feedback. Ms. Thornfield, Agent Rodriguez said formally, you are being detained for questioning regarding systematic violation of federal civil rights laws. You have the right to remain silent. As Miranda rights filled the first-class cabin, Zion's voice carried clearly to his father's phone. Dad, is this why you wanted me to practice staying calm? Yes, son. We needed to document exactly how discrimination happens to children like you. Your courage today is going to protect other kids from going through this. But Agent Chen's next revelation would show that Margaret's crimes went far deeper than anyone had suspected. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Thornfield isn't just a racist passenger. She's a consultant for a company that helps airlines systematically remove minority passengers while avoiding obvious legal violations. Her connection to the network shocked federal agents. Subscribe to uncover the truth, asterisk. Agent Chen's revelation about Margaret's consulting work sent shockwaves through the first-class cabin, but what she revealed next would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the airline industry. Ms. Thornfield works for Premium Passenger Solutions, a consulting firm that specializes in what they call demographic passenger management, Agent Chen announced, consulting her tablet with grim precision. Their clients include 12 major airlines across North America. Margaret's face had gone beyond pale to genuinely gray as she realized the full scope of her legal exposure. I can't discuss proprietary business practices. Agent Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years investigating corporate crime. Ms. Thornfield, we have 18 months of your emails, phone records, and internal company documents obtained through federal warrant. Your consulting firm has been systematically teaching airlines how to discriminate against minority passengers without leaving obvious evidence. Dr. Rachel Kim leaned forward with professional fascination and personal outrage. They actually created a system for legal discrimination. Not legal, Agent Chen corrected. Disguised. Premium Passenger Solutions developed what they call passenger comfort protocols that allow airlines to remove minority travelers from premium seating based on manufacturer complaints from white passengers. Zion looked up from his phone with the kind of innocent question that cut straight to the heart of adult corruption. "Agent Chen, does that mean the lady was paid to be mean to people?" The 10-year-old's simple question highlighted the calculated cruelty of what was being exposed. "In a way, yes," Agent Chen replied gently. "Ms. Thornfield receives compensation for filing complaints that result in passenger relocations. She's essentially paid to create problems that justify discrimination." Vincent Carter's voice through the phone speaker carried barely controlled fury. "Agent Chen, please tell the passengers how much money Ms. Thornfield has earned from this scheme." Agent Rodriguez consulted his evidence files. "In the past 2 years, Ms. Thornfield has received over $47,000 in consulting fees and travel vouchers from Premium Passenger Solutions for successful passenger relocations." The cabin erupted in disgusted murmurs. Margaret had literally been making a living by humiliating and discriminating against minority travelers, including children. Flight attendant Jessica Morrison looked sick as the implications became clear. "Agent Chen, are you saying our company was paying consultants to create discrimination incidents?" "Not directly paying, but participating in a system that incentivized discrimination through frequent flyer benefits, seat upgrades, and customer satisfaction metrics tied to accommodating discriminatory complaints." Dar. Kim was now recording everything on her phone, recognizing she was documenting a historic civil rights case. "How many airlines are involved in this scheme?" Agent Chen's answer made everyone in the cabin understand they were witnessing something far bigger than one racist passenger. "Our investigation has identified systematic discrimination programs at American Airlines, Delta, United, Southwest, JetBlue, Alaska Airlines, and 5 international carriers." The scope was staggering. This wasn't isolated prejudice, it was an industry-wide conspiracy to maintain racial segregation in premium airline seating. Margaret made one last desperate attempt to minimize her role. "I was just providing customer feedback. The airlines made their own decisions about passenger placement." Agent Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder and began reading directly from printed emails. "Quote from your supervisor at Premium Passenger Solutions, Margaret, excellent work on Flight 293. The family relocation was handled smoothly and the complaint documentation will protect the airline from discrimination claims. Your bonus for this quarter reflects your success in maintaining demographic targets." The word demographic targets hit the cabin like a bomb. This wasn't about customer service or passenger comfort, it was about racial quotas designed to keep minority passengers out of premium seating. Zion's voice cut through the shocked silence with devastating clarity. "Dad, they had targets for hurting people like me?" Vincent Carter's response carried the weight of a father's protective fury and a billionaire's power to demand justice. "Yes, son. But their targeting you was the mistake that's going to bring down their entire operation." Agent Chen continued her methodical destruction of the conspiracy. Premium Passenger Solutions maintains what they call passenger demographic profiles for frequent minority travelers. They coordinate with consultants like Ms. Thornfield to ensure these passengers face consistent service issues designed to discourage them from booking premium seating. Dr. Kim stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "You're describing systematic harassment designed to enforce racial segregation in commercial aviation." "That's exactly what we're describing," Agent Rodriguez confirmed. "And it gets worse. They specifically target families with children, elderly travelers, and people who might be less likely to file formal complaints." The cruelty was breathtaking. Margaret and her company had deliberately targeted the most vulnerable travelers, including children like Zion, because they were less likely to have resources to fight back. Jessica Morrison was typing frantically on her tablet, clearly documenting everything for what was going to be massive internal investigations. Agents, are you saying Meridian Airlines executives knew about this program? Agent Chen's answer would reshape the airline industry. We have recorded phone calls between Meridian's Customer Relations Director and Premium Passenger Solutions discussing passenger mix optimization and maintaining brand image through demographic management. The euphemisms couldn't disguise what was being described: systematic corporate racism implemented at the highest levels of airline management. Margaret finally understood that her cooperation might be her only chance to avoid decades in federal prison. I have information about other operations. Premium Passenger Solutions doesn't just work with airlines. Agent Rodriguez stepped closer, recognizing a potential break in the case. What other operations? Hotels, restaurants, retail stores, entertainment venues. Any business that wants to manage their customer demographics without obvious discrimination. The conspiracy was even broader than federal investigators had suspected. Margaret's company was essentially selling discrimination as a service to any business willing to pay for it. Zion looked around the cabin at the shocked faces of adult passengers, then spoke to his father with the wisdom of someone far older than 10. "Dad, how many kids got hurt before someone decided to stop this?" Vincent Carter's voice carried both pride in his son's courage and determination to ensure justice. "Too many, son. But your bravery today is going to make sure no other child has to go through what you just experienced." Agent Chen approached Zion with genuine respect. "Master Carter, your composure during this incident provided crucial evidence for our federal case. You helped expose a conspiracy that was harming children across the entire airline industry." But as agents began formally processing Margaret for detention, she made one final revelation that would show just how deep this conspiracy really went. "The children aren't random targets," Margaret said desperately, clearly hoping cooperation would reduce her sentence. "Premium Passenger Solutions maintains profiles on high-profile minority families. They specifically target the children of successful Black and Latino business leaders." The targeting of successful minority families' children was the most sinister aspect yet revealed. The targeting of children revealed something even darker. Subscribe before the next shocking twist, *. Margaret's desperate revelation about targeting high-profile minority families sent a chill through the first-class cabin that had nothing to do with the aircraft's air conditioning. Agent Chen exchanged a significant look with Agent Rodriguez. This was the confirmation they'd been seeking for months. "Ms. Thornfield," Agent Chen said with deadly calm, "are you telling us that Premium Passenger Solutions maintains specific profiles on the children of successful minority business leaders?" Margaret nodded frantically, clearly hoping her cooperation would earn leniency. "They call it the Heritage List. Children of prominent Black, Latino, and Asian families who might generate media attention if discrimination incidents become public." The calculated cruelty was breathtaking. Rather than avoiding high-profile targets to prevent publicity, the consulting firm was specifically seeking them out. Dr. Rachel Kim leaned forward with professional fascination and personal horror. "Why would they deliberately target children whose families have resources to fight back?" Agent Rodriguez consulted his tablet, cross-referencing information with growing amazement. "Because humiliating the children of successful minority families sends a message to the broader community. It's psychological warfare designed to reinforce social hierarchies even in supposedly integrated spaces." Zion looked up from his phone where he'd been listening to his father with the kind of innocent question that cut straight to the heart of adult evil. "Agent Rodriguez, you mean they wanted to hurt kids to make their parents feel bad?" "Yes," Agent Rodriguez replied gently. "They believed that if they could make successful minority families feel unwelcome in premium spaces, it would discourage others from aspiring above their station." The ugly phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Vincent Carter's voice through the phone speaker carried barely controlled rage. "Agent Chen, please tell the passengers how long Premium Passenger Solutions has been maintaining profiles on minority families." Agent Chen pulled up files on her tablet with the grim efficiency of someone who'd spent months building this case. 7 years. They've documented what they call disruption opportunities involving the children of 847 prominent minority families across North America. The scope was staggering. Nearly 1,000 families had been systematically targeted for harassment, with their children used as weapons to inflict psychological damage on successful parents. Margaret was now crying, finally understanding the monstrous nature of what she'd been participating in. "I didn't know. I thought we were just maintaining service standards." Agent Rodriguez's voice carried no sympathy. "Ms. Thornfield, you filed a complaint about a 6-year-old girl last year, claiming she was too loud for first class. That child was the daughter of Senator Rodriguez from California. The complaint resulted in the family being moved to coach and publicly humiliated." Flight attendant Jessica Morrison looked sick as she consulted her tablet. That incident generated 17 news articles about airline discrimination. The family filed a federal complaint. Which was exactly what Premium Passenger Solutions wanted, Agent Chen explained. They documented the incident as a success because it created public controversy that made other minority families think twice about booking premium seating. Dr. Kim was now openly recording everything, recognizing she was witnessing the exposure of systematic terrorism designed to maintain racial hierarchies. "This isn't customer service, this is organized psychological warfare." Zion's voice cut through the adult outrage with devastating clarity. "Dad, were they planning to hurt me too?" Vincent Carter's response carried the weight of a father's protective fury and a billionaire's power to demand justice. "Yes, son. But their mistake was targeting a family that had the resources and determination to expose their entire operation." Agent Chen smiled grimly at the 10-year-old. "Master Carter, your family has been on Premium Passenger Solutions' heritage list for 3 years. Today's flight was specifically monitored because their systems flagged you as a high-value disruption target." The revelation that Zion had been deliberately targeted made every adult in the cabin feel protective rage on behalf of this remarkable child. Margaret looked up with desperate hope. But the boy's father set this up. This was entrapment. Agent Rodriguez's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Ms. Thornfield, entrapment requires law enforcement to induce someone to commit a crime they wouldn't normally commit. You voluntarily chose to discriminate against a 10-year-old child based on his race. No one forced you to reveal your prejudices." Agent Chen continued her methodical destruction of the conspiracy with information that would reshape federal civil rights enforcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, Premium Passenger Solutions operates as part of a broader network called Heritage Enforcement Services. They provide discrimination consulting to businesses across multiple industries." Dr. Kim's professional curiosity was now fully engaged. "What other industries?" "Private schools, exclusive clubs, luxury retail, high-end restaurants, vacation resorts, any business that wants to maintain demographic exclusivity without obvious violations of civil rights laws." The conspiracy reached far beyond airlines into every aspect of premium consumer experience. Margaret's company was essentially selling Jim Crow segregation disguised as customer service optimization. Zion looked around the cabin at the shocked faces of adult passengers, then spoke to his father with wisdom that seemed far beyond his 10 years. "Dad, how long did you know they were planning to be mean to me?" Vincent Carter's voice carried both pride in his son's courage and satisfaction at the successful completion of a complex plan. 6 months, son. When Premium Passenger Solutions flagged our family for targeting, FBI Agent Chen and I began coordinating this operation to catch them in the act." Agent Chen nodded with professional respect. Mr. Carter's investment in Meridian Airlines provided the perfect cover for federal surveillance. We needed to document the discrimination happening to create an unshakable federal case. Dr. Kim realized she was witnessing something historic. "Mr. Carter, you deliberately put your 10-year-old son in harm's way to expose this conspiracy. Dr. Kim, my son faces discrimination every day simply for being a successful black child in predominantly white spaces. The difference is that today, we documented it with federal agents as witnesses and we're going to use that evidence to protect thousands of other children. Agent Rodriguez was reviewing files on his tablet when he made a discovery that would show the true scope of Heritage Enforcement Services. Agent Chen, look at this. Premium Passenger Solutions was planning to expand their airline program internationally. They have contracts pending with British Airways, Air France, and Lufthansa. The discrimination network was preparing to export American-style segregation to international aviation, potentially affecting millions of minority travelers worldwide. Margaret was now sobbing as the full consequences of her actions became clear. I never wanted to hurt children. I just wanted to maintain standards. Zion's response demonstrated a maturity that made every adult in the cabin ashamed they hadn't immediately defended him. Ma'am, I think your standards were just about not wanting to sit next to people like me. The 10-year-old simple truth cut through all the corporate euphemisms and consultant doublespeak to expose the raw racism underlying the entire conspiracy. Agent Chen was coordinating with federal prosecutors via secure communication when she received information that would reveal Vincent Carter's masterstroke. Mr. Carter, she announced, federal teams are simultaneously executing warrants at Premium Passenger Solutions offices in 12 cities. We're also serving warrants on Heritage Enforcement Services and their subsidiary companies. But Vincent Carter's response would show that his planning went far deeper than anyone had suspected. His father's true plan left everyone stunned. Subscribe for the revelation, *. The silence in the first-class cabin was profound as Vincent Carter's voice carried through the phone speaker with the satisfaction of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan had just achieved perfect execution. Agent Chen, ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today isn't just about my son's courage in facing discrimination. This is the culmination of an 18-month federal investigation that required the participation of 43 minority families willing to put their children in harm's way to expose systematic racism. The revelation hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Dr. Rachel Kim stared at her phone, realizing she'd been recording not just an incident of discrimination, but a masterfully coordinated federal sting operation. 43 families? Dr. Kim asked with amazement. Agent Rodriguez consulted his tablet with evident pride in the operation's scope. 43 families from the Heritage List volunteered their children for monitored flights over the past year and a half. Every incident was documented with federal agents as witnesses. Zion looked up from his phone with the kind of innocent question that revealed the true heroism of what had been accomplished. Dad, were other kids as scared as I was? Vincent Carter's voice carried paternal pride and protective tenderness. Some were, son. But every single child who participated knew they were helping protect other kids from going through this alone. You were all incredibly brave. Margaret Thornfield, still detained in the aisle, looked genuinely shocked as the scope of the operation became clear. You orchestrated all of this. The reservations, the seating arrangements, the timing. Agent Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent months building an unshakable case. Ms. Thornfield, Premium Passenger Solutions' own targeting algorithms made our job easier. When you flagged high-profile minority families for disruption opportunities, you essentially provided us with a schedule of when and where to place federal surveillance. Flight attendant Jessica Morrison was typing frantically on her tablet, documenting what was clearly the most significant civil rights case in aviation history. Agent Chen, are you saying Meridian Airlines executives didn't know about the federal operation? Correct. Only Mr. Carter, myself, Agent Rodriguez, and our federal team knew about the coordination. We needed airline staff and management to react naturally to discrimination incidents to document their complicity. The brilliance of the strategy was becoming clear. Vincent Carter had used his investment in the airline to create legitimate reasons for federal agents to be on targeted flights while keeping airline management unaware of the surveillance. Dr. Kim leaned forward with professional fascination. "Mr. Carter, how did you coordinate with other families willing to risk their children's emotional well-being for this operation?" Vincent's response revealed the depth of planning that had gone into this moment. Dr. Kim, when successful minority families discover their children are being systematically targeted for harassment, many of us decided we had two choices: accept it silently or fight back strategically. Agent Rodriguez added context that showed the true scope of what had been accomplished. "The evidence we've gathered over 18 months includes documented discrimination against 127 minority children, with federal agents as witnesses in each case. This represents the largest civil rights case in commercial aviation history." Zion's voice cut through the adult conversation with devastating clarity. "Agent Rodriguez, does that mean 127 kids got hurt to help other kids?" "Yes," Agent Rodriguez replied gently, "but their courage means thousands of other children won't have to experience what they did. Sometimes protecting others requires people to be brave when they're scared." The 10-year-old's wisdom about sacrifice for the greater good made every adult in the cabin reflect on their own courage in facing injustice. Margaret was crying now, finally understanding that her discrimination hadn't just hurt individual children, it had contributed to systematic trauma inflicted on minority families across the aviation industry. "I never thought about the children's feelings. I just focused on maintaining what I thought were appropriate standards." Agent Chen's voice carried no sympathy. "Ms. Thornfield, your standards resulted in documented psychological trauma for dozens of children who learned they could be humiliated and displaced simply because of their race." Vincent Carter's voice continued with the authority of someone who'd spent billions building businesses and was now spending those resources to demand justice. "Agent Chen, please update the passengers on the broader results of today's operation." Agent Chen consulted her secure communication device with evident satisfaction. "Federal teams have executed simultaneous warrants at 17 locations across 12 cities. We're seizing financial records, email communications, targeting lists, and training materials from Premium Passenger Solutions and Heritage Enforcement Services." Dr. Kim was still recording, recognizing the historic significance of what she was witnessing. "What kind of training materials?" Agent Rodriguez pulled up files on his tablet that revealed the systematic nature of the conspiracy. Materials teaching consultants how to file discrimination complaints that appear legitimate, how to coach airline staff to remove minority passengers without obvious civil rights violations, and most disturbingly, psychological profiles designed to maximize emotional trauma to targeted families. The clinical cruelty was breathtaking. Margaret's company hadn't just been discriminating. They'd been scientifically optimizing methods to cause maximum psychological harm to minority children and their parents. Zion looked around the cabin at the shocked faces of adult passengers, then spoke to his father with remarkable composure. "Dad, are the bad people going to jail now?" "Yes, son. And more importantly, new laws are going to be passed to make sure this never happens to any other children." Agent Chen's next update would show the true scope of Vincent Carter's planning. "Mr. Carter, federal prosecutors are prepared to file charges under the Civil Rights Act, the Airline Deregulation Act, and the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. We're treating this as organized criminal enterprise." RICO charges meant that everyone involved in the conspiracy, from consultants like Margaret to airline executives who implemented discriminatory policies, could face decades in federal prison. Margaret looked up desperately, finally understanding the full consequences of her actions. "I'll cooperate completely. I'll testify against Premium Passenger Solutions, against Heritage Enforcement Services, against anyone who was involved." Agent Rodriguez approached her with formal documents. "Ms. Thornfield, your cooperation is noted, but you need to understand that 43 families documented systematic trauma to their children because of policies you helped implement. Cooperation might reduce your sentence, but it won't eliminate your accountability. Vincent Carter's voice carried the weight of paternal protection extended to all the children who'd been harmed. Agent Chen, I want to make sure the passengers understand what happens next. Federal civil rights violations carry maximum sentences of 10 years per incident. Ms. Thornfield personally filed complaints that resulted in the humiliation of 68 children over 2 years. The mathematics were devastating. Margaret was potentially facing hundreds of years in federal prison. But Vincent Carter's final revelation would show that justice was only part of his master plan. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that every family who participated in this operation will receive full compensation for their children's trauma. Additionally, I'm establishing a $50 million foundation to monitor and prevent discrimination against children in commercial travel. The transformation of individual trauma into systematic protection for future generations was the ultimate victory. But Margaret's desperate final gambit would reveal that the conspiracy reached even higher than anyone had suspected. Her final move revealed just how deep the corruption went. Subscribe for Justice *. The headlines exploded across the country like wildfire. Federal agents move against Carter and Ellison firm in landmark discrimination case. Cable news channels ran the footage on repeat, rows of suited attorneys escorted out of their glass tower offices in downtown Atlanta, faces pale under the camera lights. Margaret Ellison, once untouchable in her power, shielded her eyes as reporters shouted questions. For decades, her law firm had thrived on arrogance and intimidation. But now, federal prosecutors had enough evidence to bring the empire down. The charges were brutal: systematic discrimination, harassment, and collusion with airline executives to silence complaints. Years of ignored voices finally found their weight in court. Margaret's smirk was gone, replaced by the cold silence of a woman cornered. And as the courtroom doors closed behind her, the world outside shifted. The airline at the center of it all issued a statement within hours. Gone was the corporate defiance, the smooth denial of wrongdoing. Instead, the CEO stood stiff in front of the cameras. Effective immediately, our company will implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion training across every department. We will comply with new federal oversight, and we are committed to ensuring that incidents of demographic profiling will never happen again. It sounded rehearsed, almost hollow. But behind the words was the reality of a federal settlement so sweeping that the airline had no choice but to change. Policies were rewritten. Gate agents trained under watchful eyes. Passengers, especially children, were promised protection from the kind of humiliation that Zion had endured. And yet, the most remarkable change wasn't born in courtrooms or press conferences. It came from a boy, just 10 years old when this nightmare began, who decided silence wasn't an option. Zion Ellington, once a scared child singled out on a plane, had become something else entirely. His story sparked protests, petitions, and calls to Congress. But Zion didn't hide from the attention. He leaned into it. He spoke at community centers, telling kids their voices mattered even when adults ignored them. He partnered with advocacy groups to highlight the hidden discrimination children face in travel. By the time the settlement money rolled out, the name Zion had already become a rallying cry. And he wasn't the only one to rise. Vincent Carter, the attorney who had risked his career going toe-to-toe with Margaret's firm, took his portion of the settlement and made a decision no one expected. Instead of personal glory, he founded the Justice Forward Initiative, a legal program dedicated to funding civil rights assistance for marginalized families. From airports to schools, from housing to healthcare, Vincent poured every dollar back into the fight, determined to make sure what happened to Zion could never be repeated. The ripple effect spread faster than anyone predicted. His eyes lifted, glancing across the faces of lawmakers who had heard thousands of testimonies before, but none like this. I was scared that day. But what scared me more was knowing it could happen to other kids. Kids who don't have a voice. Kids who can't stand up for themselves. That's why I'm here. Because if children can't be safe when they travel, then none of us are safe. The words cut deep. Lawmakers shifted in their seats. Some nodded. Others simply stared. And here's the part people forget: Zion wasn't supposed to be the one with the power. He was supposed to be the silent victim, the background detail in a bigger story about lawsuits and settlements. But instead, he became the spark. And if an 11-year-old boy can face down an entire industry, what excuse do the rest of us have for staying silent? By the time Zion finished, the chamber erupted in applause. Senators, reporters, even hardened attorneys wiped at their eyes. The chairwoman of the committee leaned forward. "Young man, your courage has done what years of policy could not. You have changed how we see this issue forever." And she wasn't wrong. Because courage isn't about size. It isn't about age. It's about standing tall when the world tells you to sit down. Zion proved that. Vincent reinforced it. And even Margaret's downfall became proof that no system built on discrimination can withstand the weight of truth forever. The cameras followed Zion as he left the hearing. Reporters shouted questions, microphones waved in his face. But Zion didn't stop for sound bites. He walked straight into the arms of his mother, who held him tight, whispering words only he could hear. The boy who once clutched his backpack in fear on a grounded plane now walked through marble halls as a voice for millions. And maybe that's the lesson the world needed to see, that courage doesn't always wear a suit, or carry a law degree, or sit behind a bench. Sometimes, it's found in the voice of a child who refuses to be silenced. So ask yourself, if Zion, at 11 years old, could challenge billion-dollar corporations and force Congress to listen, what's stopping you from raising your voice when you see injustice? Silence protects no one. Courage protects us all. And if this story inspired Congress, if the bravery of a child reshaped an entire industry, then you already know what comes next. Subscribe now, because young voices matter, and the next one we tell may be the voice that changes your world too.